Welcome. We are now ready to begin the final session here today. This is a session after my own heart, Weaving Legacies, Indian Handlooms with Industry Pioneers by Teamwork Arts. We're joined today by an eminent panel. Let me introduce them briefly. David Abraham, who is one of India's best-known designers, joins us. Meera Goradia, who is the co-chair of Creative Dignity, is also part of the panel. She has been working with artisan groups in various capacities since 1989. We are delighted that Pavithra Muddaya, who co-founded Vimor and who has worked with handloom design development for nearly 50 years, is also here. Sooraj Bhat, who is the CEO of Ethnic Business at Aditya Birla Fashion and Retail, joins us. They are in conversation with Sanjoy Roy, who is not a stranger to this auditorium. In addition to his other accomplishments, today we have learned that he is a moderator par excellence. Over to you, Sanjoy. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. And I know it's that deathly time of the afternoon where the railway mutton curry is weighing very heavily in everybody's stomach, and everybody's gone off to sleep. But I have a really exciting conversation lined up. We have some of the leaders in this sector, and I'm going to just start by giving you a little bit of a background in terms of where we sit presently. So, as I said in the earlier session, or perhaps I didn't say it, one of the things that has happened is that we've been saying for a while that the creative and the cultural sector has over 400 million people who earn either a primary or a secondary income from this particular sector. That means much of the agrarian economy between harvest and sowing, all of them look to a secondary source of income. So they sing, they dance, they do puppetry, they weave, they do handloom, they do craft. And when there's a drought or a flood, what they do is then they go to the next district to be able to earn and send back home. And that was one of the reasons why in COVID, everything just stopped completely. So you had all of these people who we now call or identify as the gig economy, but there was no business transaction for them. And one of the things that we had suggested to government at that point, early April of 2020, is why don't they pick up the inventory that these craftspeople had done, hold it in their showrooms, in their state emporia or whatever, or put it online and build. Sadly, it didn't happen, and we've seen the kind of difficulty that much of this sector faced. One of the solutions that was given at that point, and Pavithra, you and I have spoken about it, they said, why don't they join MG Narega, the scheme, which most of you know the MG Narega scheme then applies for people who are out there doing something that's physical and creating physical, infrastructure, roads, now waterworks, etc. Except that we forget that it takes 1 million times of doing something to build muscle memory, to be able to weave or stitch or create the kind of work that we see in India. And it's one of the most fabulous collection of continued work that you're seeing today coming through generations. And by doing anything else, apart from that, you destroy muscle memory, and therefore you destroy the tradition. So given that context, I'm going to start and I'm going to ask our colleagues. I'm going to start actually with Pavithra. For those of you, how many of you know Vimor, or how many of you own a Vimor sari or a lungi? I have many lungis from Vimor, yeah. Pavithra, you all are over 3 decades or 4 decades old, five decades old. You all started working with, I think, 2 weaving families when your mother first started this. Today you are impacting at least 500,000 people in terms of jobs and upskilling, etc. Tell us a little bit about how that journey worked, Pavithra. Tell us a little bit about the journey. But most importantly, how did you create the skill set to be able to expand and bring back all of these people into the community?
Thanks, Sanjoy. Yeah, what started as a necessity, because at 16 I lost my father, and that's how we registered Vimor. And my mother had worked both with Pupil Jaikar and Kamala Devi. They were tough women, and at that time I didn't appreciate them. Now I realize the value that they brought to my work. Having said that, I think what we realized early on is basically when we settle down after a year or two, our philosophy is if I win, you too have to win. And we had that kind of compassion, empathy for any artisan and any craftsperson. Everyone that who came to our door was never sent away. We may not have had the money, but we guided them in some which way that they could make a commercial success of themselves. And when you said, how do we do it? So when a man comes and he shows me what he can do, instead of finding fault with the sari or with whatever piece it is, we would always build his pride and confidence saying 2 lines are great. Is the color is great. Can you shift that line a little more? So I think this part of it that worked was to build that pride and confidence that he had the capacity. And when you do it along with an advance paid and a buyback, he works in a risk-free environment. When you work in a risk-free environment, you have security for your family and how you can feed them. Then you can look at creativity, because nobody can be creative on a hungry stomach. And I think this sort of worked, and slowly, because the time when they made us a product and we ordered it, I didn't come from a design background, but I think slowly it came to me. So when there was a buyback, so for 1 year I sold the product in my store. After 1 year I was fed up. I gave them the design. I don't believe in IP and patents, so they took it. It was test marketed at Vimor. By that, they knew that they could go and supply anywhere. Until today, I can tell you, without any marketing or branding of my brand, it is in the market from 48 years. Whether it was Kamala Devi or Mrs. Gandhi who wore it, to the school teacher. You could teach differently, different sections of who their clientele was. So I think that was fabulous about how we could use design. And I think it was very important to have that sense of integrity and that empathy, because that is the human aspect of what the weaver has. You know, till date, in 50 years, I've never had anyone who's cheated me, no bounce checks. And this is something, I mean, in every line you look at machine and everything else. You don't look at the human effort and the beauty of the human soul. That this is it. Today, they're beyond me. They supply the rest of India. Their sons are MBA boys. And the fathers bring them to me. I don't know how to use the computer, but I teach design. And that has sort of got them to be my family. So this is it, and today they supply the rest of India, and I'm happy to celebrate that, you know.
But Pavithra, your garments, like most garments, tell a story. Yes. And each garment has a different story. Each sari, every border has a different story.
So actually it's all about storytelling and...
about charcha.
Yes, and like charcha, even the ones in the museum that we have set up, every sari has a story. Because in my museum, I look at textiles that don't belong to royalty, or we don't say 17th century, 18th century, because it was done by kings who had the kind of resources. This was about what your grandmother wore and my grandmother wore. It was beyond, even though they didn't have the resources, they wanted to wear and customize what they wanted to wear. And that is something very important, because we never take that into account when we talk about the textile history of our country. So that is what made me look at it. And that was an easy point to teach the weavers, because it was not the most expensive sari. So the weaver at the lower level could take it up till he could grow to a higher level. And I think that story it comes with a memory. Every story has a memory.
How many of you knew that Vimor has a museum in Bangalore? And have you all been? The ones you've been? Everybody else who lives in Bangalore, please, the Vimor Textile Museum is absolutely stunning. Every drawer that they open, you're fascinated by what it is. As of course is the beautiful museum in the craft space in Pragati Maidan.
So just to add 1 minute before I give a chance. So we have a lot of weavers who come for any craft exhibition, they are sent here. So when this group of weavers come, we open it out, they sit and they draw and they copy and there are looms that they can try. I wanted it a space where they could feel comfortable because this is their instrument, the loom. And so they could sit down and try and figure out, is this okay or could we think of something else? And that I think is very important to have the dialogue to allow them to grow.
Uh, David, when the fashion industry actually got launched, Ritu Kumar in her garage in Kolkata, Rohit Khosla, Rohit Bal, it was still very nascent. It was very homegrown in the way that we are seeing it today. Today, it's a huge industry. A number that was thrown to me recently was um, the fashion industry per se is valued at something like 45,000 crores, primarily driven by wedding garments, etc. Can you share with us how this has grown and what it's meant in terms of creating opportunities, creating jobs, mainlining them, mainstreaming them into what we are seeing? It's the same. It's not that the textile tradition per se has changed, but the way it's being today sold and seen as something which is value plus, and that's a great story.
I think the change that has happened over the past, I would say about 30 years, 40 years, has been actually about the change in the economic conditions in this country, with increasing wealth and education and much larger disposable incomes on one hand, and exposure to consumption. And then, of course, now in the past 10 or 15 years, with the digital world, international trends in consumption, that's propelling this. And it's increasing, it's getting faster. I'm seeing it getting faster, and it's definitely going to grow. So that's undoubted. Within the scope of this conversation regarding the handloom sector, I think handloom and craft, I would put it, because I think one section of it has expanded hugely with the fashion industry, but not all. I would say that a very large part of the fashion industry that are ready-to-wear has been in the industrial sector, which is industrial textiles. The handloom sector has been used in trousseau, wedding, as you say, and they're also mostly embroidery skills, rather more than woven, are used a great deal. Certain amount of weaving, but when you get into the ready-to-wear clothing industry, I think the percentage is somewhat less. And there are reasons for that. Because traditions actually do change. That's why when you said that it's the same traditions, I don't think it's the same traditions. The modern consumer has a different taste. Society has changed. A lot of the traditional textiles that have been woven in different parts of the country all were rooted in a very, very strong cultural, located in a very strong cultural place.
The Kanjivaram, the Banarasi, the temple saris.
Even tribal saris, you go to Orissa, you go to Puttapakka and Andhra. I mean, everything had a specific purpose for a specific community. Those communities are now broken down. They've spread. People have moved away. A lot of them are in different parts. You don't necessarily wear a particular textile as a marker of your identity. Those constructs are all breaking down. And what has also happened is a lot of people are moving into ready-to-wear clothing. Now, the trick is going to be, how do we match the two? Because as tastes evolve in consumers, who are not necessarily looking for a piece of fabric that will be an identity marker, but it's going to respond to a contemporary trend, we need to find a way in which we can bridge that gap in this particular context. And I think that the language has to be, this is where design comes in, as Pavithra said also. We need to constantly explore the language of design to make sure that it answers the needs of these users.
But has the skill set of the actual artisan, has that changed? Has that evolved? Or is it still pretty much in the handloom and handicraft and textile tradition the same, meaning is the same looms? Has the looms evolved? Has it become easier? Has it become more difficult? And how does the learning then go from one generation to the other?
You see, it depends really on the craft or the textile. The very popular ones, and particularly I would say, like, for example, let's look at embroidery. About 30 years ago, the embroidery skills were really not very, I mean, they were good, they were great, we always talk about. But if you go today, and I've been through the archives of the V&A, where they've got all the great costumes of India. The skills, embroidery skills today that you see on a wedding dress that is being done are much higher. So skills in some areas have grown vastly because there is a need for them. I see the same thing, for example, in Dhamarka, where they do the ajrak weavers. Popular. Skills are very high, and they are producing much higher. In places where there is not that much consumption, or those textiles haven't adapted to find the right market, it lags a little there. But then having said that, I think it's very important that we also examine the nature of handmade textiles, handloom. Essentially in India, hand-woven textiles were developed for unstitched garments. I've discussed this with you, Meera. So therefore, when you have an unstitched garment, which is a length of fabric like a sari, the warp, I'm getting a bit technical here if you'll excuse me, the warp and the weft have a different ratio because the fabric has to move like this, because at one part of the body, it's draped this way, here it's draped another way, and then it hangs at the back. So it has this pliability. You have then the borders on both sides, which add weight, definition, and hold it down, and then you have the pallu. What happens when the handloom weaver is weaving fabric for ready-made clothes? Is the biggest challenge. How many pairs of handloom pants have you had that don't bag at the knees? Or have seam slippage when you bend and your armhole split? So these are structural problems. This is not the lack of weaving skill, or this is the feedback that the market or the people who like us, who intervene with the weavers, we have to bring these knowledge, these skills and these practices to the weavers.
But you'll still work with kurtas.
It
for
works,
example,
but life is more than kurtas. The fashion industry, which is growing into these multi-billions, requires a little more than a kurta. You also need a pair of pants occasionally. So, well, that's up to, you could wear one of our lungis.
Meera, going back, you've been doing so much of work in Kutch, and I don't know any of you read Meera's book on the traditions there and what she's been able to accomplish. But much of the work there is timeless. The work that's been created in Kutch, whether it adorns somebody in some way, or it becomes a bag, or it becomes an adornment, those are timeless. Tell us a little bit about how you started working there and what was the impact, again, in terms of when you started, how many families, how many communities, and how has that grown, even as demand, I think, has far outstripped, in your case, supply?
So I think to answer the first question, why did I go to Kutch? I think I've just always been very fascinated by the world of handmade. It speaks very deeply to me, so the motives, the vocabulary, the products. And what led me there was not so much a desire to do good or to help artisans, but just to really be with them, because I felt that there was a creativity, exchange of creative energy that I got working with them. And once I began working there with the handloom weavers, and I also went because of a conversation I had with one of the weavers. This was just immediately after the earthquake of 2001. And the weaver was anticipating that there would be changes that would come. And he said, why don't you come and help us prepare for those changes? And I thought that was so insightful and intelligent of him to have perceived that. So I said, okay, let's see what we can do. And he was actually anticipating a stagnation, which one has seen time and again in all informal handloom clusters. that because it's unorganized, it's unregulated, an idea takes off, a fad picks up, and then, everybody starts working on it, and then there's a dilution, and then it falls flat on its face. And he was seeing a similar stagnation, and he said, let's do something to create a USP for our cluster. So I think that was, it was a very, very equal relationship with which I went there. And through all my work, I have realized that the skills, the knowledge, even the, the sort of practical common sense, coupled with creative intuition, has been very, very unique. And I believe that this is really the cultural intelligence of our country, which comes when a community is still steeped in these practices. Of course, this has not happened in a vacuum or in isolation. It has happened through long years of trade, centuries of trade, interaction. And I firmly believe that all handmade practices are very dynamic. They are always a part of play and exchange. And therefore, the human connection, the human interplay is extremely important in innovation. And I've seen that happen consistently. So I don't think that there is anything that one can say that this originated in this cluster. And that, for me, is really the human condition also, that we are so all interconnected. So it was with that spirit that I started working there. And once we identified what were the reasons for the stagnation and what could be done to sort of bring a turnaround, my organization did the R&D, because someone needs to invest in the R&D, whether it's a corporate or designer or someone like me. But the entrepreneurship of that region, the artisans, once they understood what we were trying to do, they picked it up, and then it was on fire. So it took on a life of its own. But now I think it's at a point where it needs a regulation. So this is like, it's a conundrum, right? That you celebrate the diversity and the multiplicity of individual entrepreneurs, but on the other hand, as a community which is unregulated and which the market then sort of enters in and interacts with, then there is a certain kind of, I wouldn't use the word regulation, but certain forces that come into play, and how does that get organized? So to what extent can you formalize it? To what extent can you keep it informal? I think these are some of the challenges that I have faced.
So you need to go from the unorganized to the organized. Sooraj, we've got 3 people working in the mostly bespoke space. Many can say that you've crossed over from the dark side now to light, because he's part of the Aditya Birla group, but he's working pretty much in the cluster which uses handcrafted material, etc. Tell us, what is it that a huge group like the Aditya Birla group, which has been known for perhaps its industrial textile work, how is it that you've suddenly got interested, not suddenly, how is it that there was this interest in this sector? And therefore, what is the impact now that you see? Reliance has started now buying. A lot of the designers are coming under their umbrella, for example. Why is this sudden interest? Is it sudden? Is there a sort of future path? Is Fab India and its success, or say Anoki, etc., were they the first movers in this space? And is there a market there to be grown to create identity like the shirt that you're wearing?
So I think the first and most important things when it comes to a more bespoke product that we're debating today is, and I'll just support what David said in terms of the last 10 years has seen a rise in affluence, and the next 10, 20 years, basis all research that we have, with the Indian economy growing ahead of the world economy, you're going to find more and more people who can afford products to buy at higher price points. And that's, I think, one of the most important foundational things to recognize today, that we may have had a more difficult journey getting to today in terms of demand for some of our products. It's going to be dramatically more easier because the wealth is going to get created in this country. Per se, you asked the question, why is there interest, and the way we in the corporate we look at it is essentially it's a position on ethnic or Indian wear. And our research essentially frames it into luxury, bridge to luxury, let's say super premium, and then let's say mass. And I think one of the things we understood and observed was that if you take the Western wear market in India, you will find that as price goes up, the demand comes down, and it's like a pyramid, it's like a triangle. But if you look at Indian wear, of course, at the mass level, the market is much larger. But when it goes to luxury, it's a little more hourglass shaped. It's the most expensive. It's a large market there. Now, if you take this framework of market segments and then bring in the supply side, about which many have spoken, I think you'll find that the reason we are interested in is it is a large market. And the other big trend that we see is that it's going from organized to unorganized to organized. Now, what does that mean? It's a bit of a catchphrase, but essentially, when you are an organized player, you either create a brand like we've done in Taswa along with Tarun Teliani, or we acquire a brand and then invest in scaling it up. And scaling it up is usually more stores, more demand generation. So more stores, better e-commerce website, a larger team, more access to product. And that's what essentially, as a business moves from an entrepreneur to a corporate, that's what the corporate brings to the table. So I think combination of this, the fact that there is business, there is large potential in multiple price segments, and the fact that we feel at this point in time is moving from unorganized to organized, is where that's the reason I think the Aditya Birla Group through ABFRL has gotten into the ethnic space. And therefore, in my portfolio, most brands started off at a small number. Everybody is tripling, quadrupling revenues over the last few years, because that's a task. And somewhere we will find our way in terms of profitability and so on.
Can you share some figures with us? Where do you see this? What's the runway that you're on right now?
So I think the portfolio includes Sabyasachi, Tarun Teliani, Shantanu Nikhil, Masaba, Jaipur, Taswa, TCNS, which is all in the ethnic space. We're probably at about 2.5 to 3,000 crores today, and I think it should triple in the next 4-5 years.
Triple. That means every year you're looking at a 20
easily
4%, 25%.
Because I think we believe we've invested in partners, assets who are very scalable.
And on the ground, therefore, as the demand grows, is there enough skill set and an enough hinterland system there to be able to supply?
I believe so. There are some portions, if you look at the designer spaces, each of our designers have invested in capability over many decades to get to a stage now where the scale is possible. So I find they're on an exciting ride where the growth is funded and they're able to manage the supply side. I think we've had a rich heritage of supply around handloom, crafts, etc. So it's more about, as we grow demand, how do we go and tap into the base. Couple of areas we need to, in Taswa there's a slightly different complexity around building embroidery capabilities at a more commercial level. So those are things that we are investing in getting going on that.
Pavithra, Sooraj, we've been talking about a particular economic bracket, a particular kind of price factor. Yet we know that in all of this, the person in the village still needs his or her or their garment. They need their dhotis, they need their lungis. But more equally important, we now need to also look at what's the impact of all of this on the planet, and what's the possibility of creating this in a way that is, sustainable. I remember in South Africa about 15 or 20 years ago when we took you there, one of the things that you did with the Design Institute was used banana and pineapple to create fabric, which was stunning and which they're now using.
Correct.
Talk us through how you see this going ahead.
Okay, sustainability, of course, today is a big marketing term, I believe, because in textiles, handlooms, we easily take care of at least 9 SDG goals without a doubt. So that's why it makes it necessary for us to look at handlooms, whereas we give lectures about sustainability. We have it in our backyard. Why not use it? Talking about different fibers, that same man who did the banana and natural fiber, he's done 23 fibers and he's got the Guinness Book record. So I'm just there to facilitate all this. But I've done a lot of work with waste more than 20 years ago without understanding it, because waste was very inexpensive material. So when I trained weavers in rural areas, it was the easiest thing for me to think of. Now it's made into a big thing. But every practice in the handloom other than dyeing is very sustainable. You know, even from using reeds which are plant-based, using old rafters to make looms, every aspect, if you look, there is a culture of understanding that it was sustainable. You wrap zari in old cloth. All this actually is a lesson for today's generation and for the future. We can easily teach the world on sustainability. It's all there in our handlooms. Along with why it's not helping out the weavers, I think they need to be able to tell the world that what we are doing is sustainable. But as a society, I think we have failed weavers, maybe very strong sounding, but in 75 years, most of them are unlettered. They're brilliant, they have great wisdom, great mathematical skills, but they're unlettered. So how are they to tell you about climate change when all that they are worried is about putting food on the plate? So you're talking of the creamy layer, but then when we have such a huge generation that is looking at just sustaining a daily life thing, it's not easy. My point is, why is it that we can't look at you teaching? Because handloom is something that's a teachable skill, and we have so many unemployed hands. We can teach them, and in every training program, I always insist that I have people who are not from weaver community. So, I mean, instead of saying, where's the employment, and as you said, we need 146 million jobs by 2030, what Geeta Gopinath says, handloom offers that without ruining earth, without taking its resources. Here we have it. Everything can't be looked at only as a machine. Any skilling can't be about machine and technology. I mean, handloom was also a kind of great technology, okay? But I think we should learn to understand and look back at what we've had. Because we've had examples that the highest GDP before colonization came through textiles. So we've got examples, we've had a tried, tested journey. I think we should just put our minds on looking at this and being able to create livelihood with dignity. That is my understanding.
Meera, livelihood with dignity. We talked about the creamy layer, we talked about how design, how the demand is, whatever. But what about at the artisanal level? Are they getting some of that? Is it still a trickle down, drip by drip? Or are you saying that at that level where they're actually creating this, there's much more resources now being made available because people like the Reliances and the Aditya Birla groups, etc., are now, bringing together and trying to make it a much more formal system. But are they benefiting?
Basically, I feel that we're talking about certain age-old historical equations.
And inequities.
Yeah, and inequities, which have continued historically, because even today, if you see, I think almost over 60% of people who practice hand skills are either minorities or OBCs or economically, socially underserved communities. 72% are women. And therefore, their numbers, they're like an amorphous number. They don't stand out as people who have skills. So ultimately, and then you had the system of patronage. So patronage is always unequal. So that system has continued. I don't think fundamentally that shift has happened. We are now seeing it happening, one, because I think once the designers started working with artisans, people like Pavithra, who had a certain approach, where there is certain visibility that came to artisans or the master weavers. But even then, I would not say that it's like a homogenized monolithic group. I mean, within the sector, there are various categories. There are those who are master weavers, there are those who are artist weavers, there are those who are just weaving for livelihood, There are those who are just doing supportive work. So it's very graded. And but the change that I'm seeing, particularly after COVID, so if you, like till COVID, if you spoke to any weaver, none of them wanted their children to continue in the field. And even today, in fact, I was just reading up some statistics, about 66% of weavers earn less than 6,000 rupees a month. So it's, I mean, Manrega, you earn 18,000. So it's like not, it's like pretty obvious. But the change I'm seeing after COVID is that when all the rest of the economic options collapsed, a lot of the younger generation who then had access to digital technology began engaging with this as a potential entrepreneurship enterprise. And even like the last census said, there are some 26 lakh viewers today. The figures show that about 19 lakhs are still entrepreneurs. Now, even among the entrepreneurs, you have many categories. You know, you have semi-entrepreneurs, you have entrepreneurs who work for someone else, etc., etc. So now, that is an opportunity and a hope that the younger generation is tapping into. And I think technology, the thing of access, of seeing even a whole lot of glamour linked to it with a lot of film stars, celebrities endorsing these products, retail, corporates entering the sector. And of course, a lot of startups, a lot of creative enterprises, a lot of buyers, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people who are now wanting to engage with this sector. So while at one level the demand has grown, I think the younger generation is seeing that as well. And they are also upturning this, the history of patronage. Because of their access to information, they are now looking for more equal relationships. They are not willing to get into those, the kind of patronage, I'm here to help you kind of situation anymore. And they're the ones who need new skills. They are coming out of an earlier tradition of how to do things. So it's a kind of mixed bag. They're not as immersed in the practice as perhaps their parents were. They're looking for new skills, but they're seeing hope in the sector. Again, this is a generalization. There's lots of different kinds of, practitioners still. But overall, it is still being viewed by the younger generation as a profession for those who are not educated. There's a very small percentage which is seeing it as an aspirational occupation. And I think that's something we need to work on, the civil society and all of those buyers, corporates, people who want to work.
So how do we make it sexy? How do we make this, the craft, the effort sexy? So David, so two things coming out of what Meera said. First is technology and AI and its impact. So, the doomsday commentators are saying that 60% of world's jobs will be lost as AI progresses. At the best case scenario, it's about 27 to 30%. In the only sector which would not be impacted by this is going to be the craft and the handicraft, a larger sector, because AI has a limited impact there, barring design, etc. So the first question is, how do we make this sexy? How do we make recycling sexy? How do we make fashion sexy in a way that anybody who's associated with it in the food chain feels, wow, I'm doing something, a little bit like the LIC ad these days, what does your father do? My father's a general or whatever. What does your father do? My father's at LIC. So how do we make that like a job that people are happy to announce? And the second is, what do you think the impact of technology is going to be in your segment, which is, niche handwork?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to start with is that India still is the largest repository of hand-woven textiles and craft in the world. There is nowhere else. We cannot, much of this, the majority of this cannot be done anymore. We are still doing it, and people are still making a living by it. And a lot of those skills, some are lost, but the majority are still very strong. And we're also in the fortunate position of having a growing consumer market. So these are the two basic situations, positives at this point. We need to now also begin to reiterate and make the consumer understand that what is made by hand is also luxury. Which is what the
And takes X amount of time
takes
as
time,
opposed to Y amount Y.
As Pavithra mentioned, it's limited production. Limited production means it has a smaller footprint in terms of the environment, in terms of sustainability. It is also a repository for skills which have been held for generations. So in a sense, it is our combined knowledge of centuries, really, is held by these practitioners. So there is an enormous amount of value in this industry. And I think that is something that we have to consciously focus on. We have to consciously move the product more further and further into the luxury space. In fact, as he was just saying. And we need to start whittling away the lowest parts of the pyramid in terms of, because at the end of the day, you can't survive with a 6,000 rupee salary, as she says. Even Minrega is giving you 18,000. Why is the craftsperson not being paid adequately for something which is extremely skilled and extremely valuable? So it's, what do we assign value to? So I think that's also a very important part of this whole question, that we need, the conversations need to be held continuously. And I think technology actually is a boon. Because as Meera also just mentioned, I think, for example, I know a lot of weavers. I mean, we work with a lot with the handloom and craft sector, but we also work with the industrial sector. But I've seen the change post-COVID with the handloom sector and with weavers we work with, who are now on WhatsApp all the time. I'm developing fabrics in Puttapaka with the handloom weaver on WhatsApp. So technology is a boon. And we can get on the phone, we can send emails, we can talk, we can discuss color. It's all very, very quick now. So, I mean, that's a huge advantage. But we must remember that the handloom sector produces smaller quantities. It is the nature of handloom to have short runs of production. Because of short runs of production, there is product inconsistency. We have to also understand that people have to be educated that consistency is not a marker of quality. That is a marker of quality in mass production. So everybody says after 10 meters, the fabric changes a little bit. Or after 15 meters, there's another line. We are imposing foreign standards onto, mass production standards onto the handmade. Now for us to really appreciate it as luxury, as handmade, we have to re-examine all these. And we have to be able to market it. The trick is going to be in the marketing. How do we communicate all these issues? And then, of course, to go back to my favorite grouse, which is we also have to go back to the looms. We have to change the reeds, we have to change the denting. If we want to make a fabric which is stronger in the warp, so we can cut those trousers for you without bagging at the knee. These are the things that we as designers, as people who are intervening, in this is our responsibility to the handloom industry.
Talking about technology, I hope you're sending in your questions and you had the QR code. Sooraj, Meera talked, I'll come to you, Meera, in a second. Sooraj, Meera talked about patronage. In many ways, organizations like you have taken over that mantle because you today are the patrons of this kind of bespoke word and you're trying to create value. Do you have a responsibility, therefore, to also create value and appropriate livelihood for the artisans? Today, nobody walks into a Sabyasachi or a Abraham and Thakur store and says, "Ye 10 rupiya ka kam doge kya? Ya 1 lakh ka kam doge?" They don't. But they will still do that with the artisan when you're buying it at source. So do you see this as a responsibility? And how can we build, therefore, the base in a way that can help you grow, as you said, 3x?
I think when you operate with a brand as fundamentally an agent for creating demand, whether it's Abraham Thakur, or Tarun Talyani, or Jaipur, or Taswa, I think the fundamental commitment of the corporate is to build loyalty and demand for the brand, right? And therefore, in brand comes a lot of things. For example, you won't haggle in a designer brand because buying that designer's product is aspirational. The customer gets it, the designer conducts themselves in that manner, and therefore that becomes easier for the designer to support a particular artisanal community. So the trick, or the trick is too frivolous a word, but the value that's being generated is the aspiration that the brand creates for the consumer, which is what reduces the friction in terms of consumer willing to pay the price. It's easiest in the luxury segment. I mean, once you build that aspiration, then there is a lot of value you can add, a lot of, therefore, downstream employment you can create for various arts and crafts, and that gets leveraged. It becomes a little more difficult as you get into, and I saw you essentially recommending, saying, can we please focus only where you can charge a premium, therefore then there is no question of anybody haggling with the artisan here. It becomes a little more tricky at the more mass level because, and someone mentioned sustainability, there's a research that says in India the average consumer is unwilling to pay a premium for anything sustainable, but in the US it's different. That's why I started my conversation by saying we are in a phase of growing affluence, so we'll also get there as a country, just like we've improved in the last 10, 15 years. I think there, and I found some of the recommendations very practical. The comment on seam slippage in some handloom fabrics. Those are the adjustments to be done when you're operating at a little more at a mass level. Because at that, as you go down the price point, customers pay a price for quality. That's the nature of the segment there. And I think there are adjustments one can make. He referred to some of them. And then therefore it can flow back again to steady demand for the supply base. My whole argument is, I mentioned the different price segments that we tend to operate in. You can potentially look at handloom fabrics for Western wear, but then the rules of Western wear will apply. And therefore it may not be relevant in a few places, it could be relevant in a few. It may not be relevant in women's, it could be relevant in men's, may not be relevant in garments that are slim fit cut, could be relevant in something that's a lot more easier cut. So I think we'll have to, while noting the points on the human element in arts and crafts, if we have to create demand, there has to be some adjustment of the supply to the demand. And that's the role, whether you're a designer, whether you're a corporate brand, that's the role that we have to keep searching for, because there's no perfect answer that's already available. The good thing is, if many people are launching brands, that means there'll be stores open, that means there'll be demand created, and there is a journey of learning in terms of how to create more and more demand for products like this.
You know, one of the experiments that Marcus de Sotoy, who's the Simoini professor for the advancement of mathematics, and he took over from Richard Hawkins in that particular post, we did some time ago in GLF Belfast, was we showed the audience two images. One was an original Van Gogh and one was a computer generated Van Gogh. And we asked the audiences, you know, tell us which one is the original and which one is the computer generated one. 97% of the audience in a hall like this, full, got it right. And when we asked them as to how did they get the original Van Gogh or the Van Gogh painted Van Gogh one right as opposed to the computer generated one, the answer was because the computer generated one was perfect, you know, was flawless, and therefore to some extent more boring than the original Van Gogh. But you need to educate, therefore, people, consumers and people who appreciate this part of the thing. So what do we need to do, Meera, in terms of education? And you also wanted to intervene, so both.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share, I was recently doing a very back of envelope calculation that if, you know, we're talking of about 20 lakh weavers, and generally speaking, a weaver works around 7 to 8 months of the year. And if, I mean, today, if you calculate 6,000, it's like under poverty line, right? But if, let's say, you look at an income of, say, 5 lakhs per weaver annually, What do you actually need for that to happen? You just need 4 crore people who will spend 25,000 rupees a month, a year, not a month.
A year.
A year, sorry, for that to happen. Now, in a country of 140 crore people, I mean, surely we can cultivate 4 crore people. This is just, I'm talking of India, not even talking international. So I feel that all the marketing geniuses and all the strategists, I think we really have a task cut out for us. I think it's achievable, but it will be achievable with the corresponding investment in infrastructure, training, as he said, a kind of a reorientation of some of the skills. I wouldn't say it needs to be like a top-down thing. It needs to be more a recalibration of meeting new market segments, but definitely new infrastructure, new facilities to match a certain kind of scale. That's the kind of investment that needs to be done. So even when an Aditya Birla or Reliance goes to a cluster, if there is no suitable dyeing facility over there, they are going to get flawed fabrics. So that's the investment a weaver cannot do. That's the investment a corporate can do. That's the investment government can do. But we know that government by itself cannot solve problems. So we do need to have the PPP model in that case. And,
Education.
Yeah, and also with the thousands of skilling programs that have happened, we also do workshops, and we've realized that just doing a workshop doesn't help, because entrepreneurs are so steeped with just running their business that they learn something for 5 days, 10 days, and then they get back to just running their business. What is really required is training, skilling, along with a sustained mentorship. And someone that they can, approach, someone who can sort of continuously give them feedback, continuously give them access. So I think you need to look at an ecosystem support for these sort of self-organized entrepreneurs, and a very holistic way of how an ecosystem that supports this kind of creative entrepreneurship can make artisans
Can I
thrive.
just put in one word? No, when she's talking about all this great, but the thing is also, I mean, we are taxpayers. What is the government policy doing to elevate so many people from below poverty line up? I mean, I think we should begin to ask. There is no minimum wage for a handloom weaver. We've got minimum wage on everything else, unions on everything else, but the weavers are not. And actually, the weavers believe that the farmer and the weaver, the two eyes of society. I mean, that is the feeling that they had. But the farmer, we still need our food, but we just press some button in a machine and we get fabric. So they become redundant. But the biggest policy I feel is also like this 20% discount. 75 years of 20% discount has put it in our brain that when I touch a fabric or I go to a exhibition, I demand it. I'll be having dripping diamonds in my hand, but I will insist on fighting for the 20%. Now, why do that customer doesn't need 20%? I've been talking for the longest time, revert the 20% back to the weaver. These kind of policies have all the time made us feel that I'm of no use. And I think, even about old age pension, they get such a pittance. It is really tragic for us to look at that level. You ask an old man above 60 years to go from his village to the district just to sign, okay, everything. They don't have knowledge of all the latest technology of where they can do everything on the cell phone.
No, so again, it comes back to education. Can we educate the buyer in terms of the value?
Okay.
Your museum, Pavithra, for example, has been doing some of that. You go into the museum, you see the kind of textiles, etc. But also, much of our audiences today and yesterday and tomorrow are from the not-for-profit sector, from the NGO sector. Can you all give us a sort of viewpoint in terms of how is it that they can bring in to help folks from the larger hinterland where there is a need for skills,
Absolutely.
where there is a possibility that they can work,
True.
and it doesn't have to be yardage.
Absolutely.
It can be smaller products which can be skilled by folks like this and work together with this sector to actually create value and effort and create what's required.
When you talk of education, I just like to say one thing. Most of our weavers have not come into, they have minimal education. So they're unlettered. As I say, they're brilliant, unlettered. So we have to look at adult literacy combined with different kind of ways of getting across to them. The other issue is something as complex in government policies. I was on those handloom all these brands. Okay, when a consumer goes to buy, are you to tick 10 boxes to say that this is a handloom? I mean, we make policies that make it so complex that a common person like you and me will not be able to identify it's a handloom or not. And another thing, where is the policing in such a big case? Do we have enough people to police all these? I mean, we can't police women's safety. How can we police and educate people about whether it's a handloom or a powerloom? I mean, and even the Handloom Reservation Act, I'd like to say, we had good things in place, but over time it slowly moved in. So now powerloom makes most of the saris and the consumer doesn't know whether it's handloom or powerloom. How are you going to do the education?
Balucharis, for example, is one such. You can get factory-made balucharis. Sooraj, I'm going to end with you. You know, again, you've come from the organized industrial textile segment and you've come now into this whole new segment. What do you see to be some of the great challenges that you need to overcome, both in terms of, like she said, how do we ensure that 25,000 rupees per year is spent by 4 crore people to be able to buy or afford this particular textile, as opposed to this ready-to-wear, much more affordable, easier access?
My perspective on various conversations in this particular question is that the answer lies on the demand side. I'm left with the impression that there's more supply than demand in, let's say, handloom. And therefore, the problem to solve is demand. Therefore, I think the single largest thing that needs to happen is we need brands, demand vehicles to be created which make it aspirational, at the same time a little practical, to have handloom fabrics. I mean, David spoke about the romance of the limited production and the storytelling around that. I also think in a visual manner, great design to support that. Tactile softness, handle, etc., tactile aspects of the product coming in to communicate luxury. And therefore to create brands that promote this luxury, which is supported by fantastic artisanal products. I think that's at one level, and I feel it will happen. It's a question of, I mean, industries evolve. Therefore, as brands come in, create demand, adjustments will happen, and it will happen over the next decade or two. I think that's the single largest responsibility we have. And in somewhere there comes a case of, and it can be an excruciatingly difficult task to execute at a mass scale, to explain the importance of material, craft, handloom, what it does. I think that's the effort that needs to go in. But in a country where more and more wealth is happening, more and more aspiration is getting created in domestic itself, who will organize vehicles, brands to, to cater to Meera's target of sorts, to get a lot more people interested in it and valuing it? But the core task, I think, is about the brand. And therefore, I'll go back to how you mentioned that someone mentioned that nobody haggles. Because those brands have that aspiration. It can be achieved at all price segments. Just that it'll take some doing.
Thank you all for your questions, which we're going to move to. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to cluster some of the questions and pose it to you. So, Pavithra, can sustainable Indian handlooms be a way to reclaim India's lost pre-colonial influence over global fashion?
I am of the firm belief that if it has survived for 2,000 years, and even before the colonization, we've had a history of it. There's no reason that it won't survive. You have to understand that, I mean, the unstitched garment, dhoti, whatever, we are the only country that's had a continuous use. Every other national garment in whichever country has become an occasion wear. For us, it is, we've got such a large Indian population that continues to wear it. It comes because of its adaptability, the way it can be used and styled according to each one's body, climate, styles, rituals, whatever it is. And there is no doubt in my mind that we will lose it, because any other country that wants to catch up with us, our hand skills and our textile skills will take another 100 years to get there.
If they have the understanding of it. Meera, handloom is in survival stage or revival stage?
I think it's in the survival stage, because whatever we are seeing is a very small percent. The revival is very, very small compared to the threat that we are faced with. So it is a critical sort of juncture for us, but the kind of global consciousness now for sustainability and the debates going around that, I feel it's an opportunity for us to tap, but it's not going to happen by itself. We're going to have to prepare on the ground for it. We're going to have to devise, the infrastructure, the measurement tools, even sort of working with mindsets, even building our own narrative of sustainability, which is that of inclusion, equity, all of that, and cultural capital. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do, and very seriously. And I don't agree with Sooraj that supply outweighs demand. I think demand outweighs supply. But I think I've heard this story so many times that we want to buy, but we just can't find the buyer. So the problem is really investing in supply.
Sooraj, how much would an investor like the Aditya Birlas intervene in creative decision of designers? Is there an effort to ensure fairness along the value chain?
The partnerships we have done in the Birla group with designers, we believe that designers know their business better than we do. The support we give is in structure, sometimes management that comes with having managed larger businesses, which help as the designers trying to scale up from to a much larger number. The second question on fairness in value chain, again, it's really a function of the designer's vision. That's the business that we have decided to support, and all of them have respective views on how to be fair to workforce, to the factories, to the setup, and so on, and therefore it moves forward in that vein.
The other question to you is, in the premium segment where prices are already high, how important is procuring sustainable material, including cotton, to support farmers and the planet?
Yeah. In the premium segment, the prices...
Good for you guys.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what is being referred to as the premium segment, but let's say it's of a certain price point. Prices are not high. In fact, premium compared to British luxury and luxury is actually more affordably priced. And therefore, there is a whole ecosystem that exists on whether it's cotton or viscose staple or polyester that comes in and occupies a certain price value equation there. And it's a pretty organized semi-industrial or industrial setup that works.
David, just like today's generation in AI robotics, 3D printers and laser cutting technology, how will they impact the social entrepreneurship in villages who make a craft with soil and local materials? What's going to be the impact on that, in your view?
I really can't pretend to give you an answer which will be absolute, but I think maybe I can refer to the Van Gogh paintings that you were talking about, the one that was generated by AI and the one that is actual. People could actually identify the real work. I think that with 3D printers and with high technology, of course, is very capital intensive, so it may not necessarily work in a small village setup. And two, the beauty of the handmade is the personality of the maker, which the machine doesn't have. And that is what we call within apostrophes, flaws. They're not really flaws. These are the handmade interventions in every single piece that's made by hand. I don't think you can, an educated consumer will always be able to tell. the difference between the two. So I think there is still a lot of room for that.
What if you were to spin that and say that's the signature of the weaver, in the same way that when a painter paints and puts
Yeah.
his or her or their signature?
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think, again, as Sooraj was saying, it's a matter of, it's a marketing exercise also. We have to build value. Like he says, nobody will go and question a Sabyasachi lehenga. So in the same way, I don't think we should walk into a hard, what was I going to say, dastakar hard, but and start bargaining with the weavers and say, can you give me 20% off?
What people do.
People do it all the time. Popular time. Patir Billar group does that too? There you go.
Bargains with,
No.
the weaver. We won't put him on the spot right now on that one, but you can take that offline. Meera, how can we as Indians value our traditional textiles more, especially the urban middle class audience who's bombarded with mass marketing getting fast and cheap material year by year?
It's a tough question. I'm no marketing genius, but I just feel that a lot more communication needs to be done around it in a more authentic way. And I feel if there could be ways of interaction with meeting artisans, spending time with them, whether it's at schools, demonstrations, workshops, if there could be some vehicle through which more understanding of these practices was enabled, I think that could create more value. And of course, to make it sexy, maybe get like Shah Rukh Khan to talk about it. That will definitely go a very long way. But apart from that, so it's something that's puzzled me, because I recently went to this bazaar which said it was a Thailand bazaar. There was nothing Thai about it. They were all Indian vendors selling machines and flowers and all kinds of nicks and knacks. There wasn't an inch of place to stand on. And we've been seeing increasingly in the craft bazaars that, the audiences are dwindling. And I thought it's a function of the way that bazaar was portrayed, that it was imported, it was from Thailand, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot of work we need to do in the way we talk about these practices, to build a different sort of narration and perception around it at many levels. So, yeah.
Pavithra, what is the role of outlets in all of this? I remember last week or whatever, I'd gone to Meera in Calcutta, and the person who normally is there when I go wasn't there, and there was this other lady who started showing me baluchuris at 3,500 or 5,000, and then the other person came in and said, "What are you doing? He understands textiles, so you see." What stunned me was Meera even stocked woven, industrial woven baluchuris, as opposed to what they're known for, which is very specifically sourced from the village weaver in a way. What is their responsibility?
The responsibility, again, I think comes back to the government, because we have GI tagged for all these things. Okay, now Baluchari is also GI tagged, but who's policing who's done it by hand or by machine, or is it coming from Surat?
So are you saying when it's GI tagged, then you cannot or should not give it
you cannot
the same
call
name?
it the same name? Or so the GI tag, you cannot use the same name. But the thing is, if like Khadi, the weaver who's done Khadi much before even the Gandhiji did it, if he has to use the word Khadi, it's with KVIC. He has to pay a fee and then use it. So in this way, I think we're just taking off the individual small weavers. And I think it's very sad because, I mean, no offense to you, but everything is becoming a corporate way of doing things. So individual weavers with their groups, with age-old traditions, are getting lost. They have to become security guards. And another question to talk about it is, why isn't a weaver in 75 years, how many weavers own their own stores? That's something that needs to be thought about, and that's a question I ask. All of us have made our lives because of their work. But how come, what is it? They have skills, they have everything else. Okay, how many of them? My weavers all have shops. Okay, and I'm called for an inauguration to every shop. But it's a very it's a minority. Other people struggle. There is something lacking in our system that doesn't allow the maker to be his own boss.
But it's also, I think, the difference between MIT and Harvard, right? So MIT creates, Harvard sells. We need more Harvard-type selling people in this particular thing to do the spiel and create that value. Because if you don't create that value, none of this will happen. What was really, for me, interesting, I was at NMAC, NMACC, the Nita Mukesh Ambani Center for whatever, in Bombay, day before yesterday, on Saturday. And what was lovely was to see 3 different not stores, but looms with people weaving there and selling, but these were, master weavers. That to me was really exciting, that places like this is now looking at this as a product of that value chain. So on that note, please give our wonderful speakers a round of applause. Those of you in the hinterland who are working in the area need to look at creating employment, generating jobs, etc. Look at this as an opportunity. You can reach out to them, but certainly look at it seriously within your communities. If there are people who are weaving, what can we do to be able to help them? Remember, not necessarily every intervention is positive or required. You have to look at it very, very carefully with empathy and preserving the culture and tradition. So David, Abraham, Meera, Pavithra and Sooraj, thank you all so much. Back to you.
Thank you, Sanjoy, for leading such a passionate discussion. Very evocative views, very insightful. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to you. Here in the same auditorium, we will reassemble for the Kutle Khan and collaborators concert, which begins at 7 o'clock. Please do come back. Thank you very much.